The spark in Lansing. The night was sharp with winter's bite, the kind that seeps through the cracks of wooden walls and whispers doubts into a child's ears. Malcolm Little, barely 6 years old, pressed his forehead against the frosted windowpane of their Lansing home, watching the distant glow of fire stain the horizon. His small fists curled at his sides, not from the cold, but from something far older, far heavier, fear. Inside, the house pulsed with restless energy. Earl Little, Malcolm's father, moved with a preacher's fire. His voice deep and urgent as he spoke of freedom, dignity, and a life beyond the chains of oppression. A proud follower of Marcus Garvey, Earl believed in a destiny that white America refused to acknowledge. His dreams clung to the walls like family heirlooms, delicate and easily shattered. Malcolm's mother, Louise, a strong-willed woman with Caribbean roots, stitched hope into their meals and stories, though weariness often edged her words. She knew too well how ambition could provoke wrath in a land where black hope was seen as rebellion. She had seen the men in white hoods lingering near the roads, had heard the whispers of threats that carried promises. Then one night Earl didn't come home. They found his body later, broken and battered by the streetcar tracks, the officials quick to call it an accident. But the family knew better. The men who hated him for his voice, for his pride, had silenced him. Malcolm, standing beside his grieving mother, felt a strange stillness descend upon him, a kind of invisible armor beginning to form. The little family spiraled. Insurance claims were denied. Hunger gnawed at their dignity. Louise fought desperately to hold the family together, but society's cruelty proved relentless. When her mind cracked under the weight of endless battles, the state swooped in, scattering her children like leaves in a storm. Malcolm watched it all unfold with a growing, simmering rage. The promises of fairness, of justice, felt like cruel jokes whispered by distant stars. In the sterile corridors of foster homes, he learned to distrust smiles, to read between the lines of every kindness. Yet beneath the mounting bitterness, something stubborn survived, a flicker of his father's fire, his mother's iron resolve. It hid behind Malcolm's sharp eyes and quick tongue, waiting, plotting. On a cold night much like the one that had begun his family's unraveling, Malcolm stood outside another unfamiliar home. Above him, the stars glistened indifferently. He tightened the worn coat around his shoulders and made a silent vow to himself. He would never beg for dignity. He would demand it, take it, carve it out of the world if he had to. The boy turned his back to the stars and stepped forward into the shadows, unaware that history had already begun to etch his name into its pages. The streets whisper. Boston was a city that spoke in riddles, its streets humming with jazz, its alleys breathing with temptation. Malcolm, now a lean, sharp-eyed teenager, arrived with nothing but a suitcase full of second-hand dreams and a restless hunger that gnawed at him day and night. The city wasted no time in dressing him up. A cousin introduced him to the world of zoot suits and shiny shoes, of smoky nightclubs where the air was thick with laughter, whiskey, and the scent of ambition gone sour. Under the neon haze, Malcolm learned the first rule of survival. Image was everything. They called him Detroit Red, a nickname born from his reddish hair and the quicksilver way he could charm a room. To the strangers he hustled on the corners, Malcolm was a carefree spirit, witty, confident, impossible to pin down. But behind the smooth jokes and swagger, an old wound festered, one carved by a society that had taught him long ago not to trust its promises. Days bled into nights as Malcolm slid deeper into the underbelly of the city. He ran numbers, played the edges of petty crimes, dipped his hands into whatever hustle offered a quick escape from poverty's long shadow. The city didn't judge. It only demanded loyalty to its rhythm, a rhythm Malcolm learned to master. In the back rooms of dusty pool halls, between the glint of dice and the clink of cheap liquor glasses, Malcolm built his reputation. Clever, ruthless when needed. Yet, sometimes in the rare stillness between scores, he would catch his reflection in a broken mirror and feel a jolt of recognition and shame. Was this what Earl Little had fought for? Had his father's fire been reduced to this flickering street lamp life? Still, doubts were a luxury Malcolm couldn't afford. The world didn't hand out redemption to boys like him. It gave you a role and punished you if you dared to refuse it. Then came the slip, the one every hustler secretly fears. Botched burglary. A whisper in the wrong ear. Sirens slicing the night like knives. Malcolm ran, but the streets he once danced through now turned into cages, and there was nowhere left to hide. When the police slammed him against the alley wall, it wasn't just his body they pinned down. It was every defiant hope, every dream of invincibility he had built with desperate hands. Cold steel shackles bit into his wrists, and for the first time in years, Malcolm felt truly powerless. In the harsh light of the courtroom, they didn't see a clever boy or a survivor. They saw a statistic. Another black face to be processed, numbered and forgotten. As the prison doors clanged shut behind him, Malcolm inhaled the stale air deeply, almost calmly. He understood now. Freedom was never something given. It had to be seized, rebuilt from inside the wreckage. The boy called Detroit Red was fading. In the shadows of the cell, something else was beginning to take form. The fire within. Prison was a world stripped of pretense, a grim kingdom where only the ruthless or the invisible survived. Malcolm, stripped of his zoot suits and street names, faced the naked truth of who he was. Behind the cold stone walls, time slowed into a heavy, suffocating weight. At first, he wore his anger like armor. He mocked the guards, ridiculed the system, and earned a reputation for his sharp tongue. But rage alone was a hollow weapon. It bruised but did not build. Nights stretched long and bitter, and even the strongest fury dulled under the endless grind of confinement. It was in these barren hours that Malcolm met Bimby, an older inmate whose mind was as sharp as any blade Malcolm had ever wielded on the streets. Bimby spoke with a calm authority that demanded attention. Unlike the hustlers Malcolm once admired, Bimby's power came not from violence or swagger but from knowledge. "You've been played, Red," Bimby said one evening, his voice low and steady. "Played by a system that teaches you to hate yourself before you even know who you are." The words struck deeper than any fist ever could. Malcolm, for the first time, found himself silenced, not by force but by undeniable truth. Driven by a new, gnawing hunger, he turned to the prison library. It began clumsily, with stolen glances at dusty volumes and hesitant questions. Soon he devoured books like a man starved. History, philosophy, religion. The words became keys unlocking a world he had never been permitted to enter. He copied entire dictionaries by hand, building a fortress of vocabulary around his wounded spirit. In the quiet of his cell, Malcolm confronted brutal truths. The stolen legacy of his people, the deliberate erasure of their triumphs, the machinery of oppression disguised as normal life. Every page turned sharpened his anger into something cleaner, more precise. It was no longer reckless fury. It was a purpose. Through whispered rumors and battered pamphlets, Malcolm discovered the teachings of the Nation of Islam. Their message, fiery and uncompromising, mirrored the storms raging within him. They spoke of pride, of self-reliance, of rejecting the lies of inferiority. For the first time, Malcolm saw a mirror reflecting not shame but power. He shed the name Little, a relic of slavery, and embraced X, a symbol of his stolen identity, a placeholder for the unknown greatness yet to be reclaimed. By the time his sentence neared its end, Malcolm was no longer a hustler pretending to be invincible. He was a man forged by pain, tempered by knowledge, and fueled by an unbreakable resolve. As he stepped beyond the prison gates, the world outside seemed smaller, less intimidating. The true battlefield was not the streets but the minds of his people, and Malcolm X intended to set them ablaze. The fire within him was no longer consuming him. It was ready to light the world. The voice that roared. Malcolm X emerged into the world not as a man seeking acceptance, but as a force demanding reckoning. Gone was the boy who chased shadows in the streets. In his place stood a figure sharpened by hardship, polished by knowledge, and ignited by an unrelenting sense of justice. The Nation of Islam welcomed him like a long-lost soldier. Under the mentorship of Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm's rise was meteoric. He spoke with a cadence that vibrated in the bones of the oppressed and unsettled the comfort of the powerful. His words were not polished for palatability. They were swords cutting through centuries of lies and illusions. Crowds gathered wherever he went, drawn by a voice that didn't plead for dignity. It demanded it. Malcolm spoke of black pride, self-sufficiency, and the need to dismantle systems built on centuries of exploitation. To his followers, he was a beacon in a world cloaked in smoke and mirrors. To his enemies, he was a storm gathering on the horizon. But the higher Malcolm climbed, the more turbulent the winds became. Behind closed doors, tensions grew between him and the nation's leadership. Betrayals whispered through the ranks. Surveillance shadows darkened his steps. Malcolm, once the loyal disciple, began to see cracks in the foundation he had once defended without question. In 1964, he broke from the nation, stepping into an uncertain future with only his convictions as a compass. His pilgrimage to Mecca became a revelation. He saw Muslims of all colors standing side by side, a vision that reshaped his understanding of race and struggle. The world was more complex than the rigid lines he had once drawn. His message evolved from separation to solidarity, but his passion remained unshaken. Enemies old and new closed in. Death threats became constant companions. Yet Malcolm continued, his voice louder, his message sharper. He knew the cost of truth. He had accepted it long ago. On February 21, 1965, as he addressed a crowd in Harlem's Audubon Ballroom, the final act of betrayal unfolded. Gunshots shattered the air. Panic erupted. Malcolm fell not as a victim but as a martyr carved into history. In the silence that followed, his legacy only grew louder. He had not simply spoken against injustice. He had lived defiance, carved a blueprint for courage, and dared millions to see themselves not as victims of fate but as authors of their own destiny. The boy who once stared into the cold night in Lansing had fulfilled his silent vow. He had demanded dignity, not with petitions, but with an unbreakable roar that still echoes through every soul who dreams of freedom. Malcolm X was gone, but the fire he lit refused to die. It lives on, flickering in every voice that refuses to be silenced, burning brighter with every generation that chooses to stand.